New York City admired them. Claire and Daniel Moore, the elegant art curator and the polished corporate lawyer, seemed like everything a marriage was supposed to be. Their smiles graced charity galas and museum openings. Their penthouse shimmered with the glow of ambition. To everyone else, they were perfect. Only Claire knew how silence could echo in a home that looked so full. Each morning began the same way. Daniel adjusting his tie by the mirror, Claire pretending to read emails as the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Their conversations had shrunk to headlines, meetings, exhibitions, deadlines. She remembered when his laughter filled the room, when their bed was a shared world instead of two corners. But people change, she told herself. Love evolves. Or maybe it fades quietly like light slipping off glass. Daniel was kind, still, always polite, always composed. He kissed her forehead before leaving for work, his lips cool and practiced. He never raised his voice, never lost control. And yet it was precisely that calmness that frightened her. It felt less like peace and more like distance disguised as grace. Claire often watched him from across the table, trying to find the man she married beneath the immaculate surface. Their friends envied them. The apartment overlooking Central Park, the matching careers, the illusion of certainty. But at night, when Daniel worked late and Claire sat alone, she scrolled through their photos, wondering when he had started to look like a stranger. There were no fights, no affairs that she knew of, no visible cracks, just a growing sense that something fundamental had shifted, that Daniel was somewhere else entirely, even when sitting right beside her. At the gallery, Claire lost herself among paintings, the only place that still spoke honestly. Art never lied. Brushstrokes always betrayed the hand that made them. Sometimes she envied that vulnerability. At home, Daniel's emotions were sealed behind flawless smiles. Whenever she tried to ask how he was, he deflected with a compliment or a joke, wrapping every truth in charm. Still, Claire stayed hopeful. Their upcoming 10th anniversary felt like a chance to mend the distance. A quiet dinner, a reminder of how it all began. She bought a new red dress, rehearsed conversations in her mind, tried to believe love could be revived if she just tried hard enough. That evening, Daniel came home late again. He apologized softly, blaming traffic and clients. He brought her roses, crimson, perfect, scentless. They ate in silence as rain whispered against the windows. Claire studied his eyes across the candlelight. They looked tired, guilty even, but she couldn't tell why. When she asked what was wrong, he smiled and said, "Nothing, darling. Everything's fine, but everything wasn't fine." Claire felt it, the shift in his gaze, the way he avoided her touch. When she leaned in to kiss him goodnight, he turned away under the pretense of answering a text. Her chest tightened with a fear she couldn't name. Later, lying awake, she heard the faint sound of the closet door sliding open. Daniel moved quietly inside, almost ritualistically. The sound of a small box closing followed, deliberate, careful. Claire closed her eyes, pretending to sleep, but curiosity burned like fire beneath her ribs. In the dim glow of morning, Daniel was gone before sunrise. His side of the bed looked untouched. The air smelled faintly of perfume, not hers. Claire sat up slowly, the unease settling deep within her. She didn't yet know it. But that morning marked the end of the illusion, the moment before discovery, before truth unraveled everything she thought she knew. And by the next night, she would open that closet. The next evening began like any other, quiet, sterile, and predictable. Rain pressed softly against the apartment windows, the city lights shimmering through the glass like distant fire. Claire moved through the rooms in silence, her footsteps echoing against marble floors that suddenly felt too large for one heart to fill. Daniel had texted that he'd be home late again. Another client dinner. Another lie she didn't have the courage to challenge. She poured herself a glass of wine, the sound sharp in the stillness. The red liquid caught the lamplight, dark and heavy, like something that might stain forever. She stared at the clock. 10:47 p.m., the same minute as last night when she'd heard the closet door slide open. Her eyes shifted to the hallway. The memory of that faint sound haunted her. Something inside her whispered that answers were waiting there. that if she just looked, she'd finally understand the man who had turned into a stranger beside her. She stood up. Her hand trembled slightly as she walked toward the bedroom. Every step felt heavier, as if the apartment itself wanted to hold her back. When she reached the closet, she hesitated, staring at the polished wood. Her reflection in the mirror door looked unfamiliar, anxious, pale, and determined. The door slid open with a slow sigh. For a moment, everything appeared normal, suits arranged by color, silk ties rolled neatly, shoes shining beneath the soft light. But at the far end, hidden behind a row of jackets, something caught her eye. A small black box, tucked away deliberately. She pulled it out, her heart hammering. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were things that didn't belong to Daniel Moore, the lawyer, husband, and man she knew. A long blonde wig, red lipstick, a sequined dress folded with care, foundation, perfume, a pair of lace gloves. Claire froze, the room spinning slightly. She lifted the wig, soft, feminine, smelling faintly of vanilla and cigarette smoke. Her mind scrambled for logic, but none came. Maybe it was a costume from a charity event, a client's forgotten belongings? But she knew better. The items were too personal, too meticulously arranged. Her breath came fast. The wine glass she held slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The sound jolted her back into the present. She gathered the scattered pieces, cutting her palm slightly, though she barely felt it. Blood mixed with spilled wine, seeping into the rug, a silent omen she wouldn't yet understand. She placed everything back exactly as she'd found it, hands shaking. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the closet as the storm outside grew louder. Questions clawed through her mind. Why the secrecy? Who was he when he wasn't Daniel Moore, the perfect husband? When she finally heard the elevator ding down the hallway, she wiped her hands, straightened the bedspread, and forced her face into calm. Daniel entered moments later, wet from the rain, smiling faintly as if nothing was wrong. He kissed her cheek. "You're still up?" he asked softly. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. He nodded, heading straight to the bathroom, avoiding her eyes. She listened to the sound of water running, the rhythmic tap of a cabinet opening and closing. When he returned, he looked lighter, as if the mask had been put away again. They went to bed in silence. Claire stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between his breaths. Every inhale felt like a lie, every exhale a secret slipping past her. In the dim light of dawn, she made a decision she couldn't yet name: to watch, to listen, to learn. Love had become surveillance. Trust had turned to investigation, and somewhere in her chest, suspicion began to bloom into something darker, something that would soon lead her far beyond the closet, into places no wife should ever have to go. Tomorrow night, she told herself, she would follow him. The streets of downtown Manhattan had a way of swallowing people whole, especially at night. Claire followed Daniel from a distance, her heels clicking faintly against the wet pavement, eyes fixed on the back of his black coat. The neon lights of the city blurred, reflecting off puddles, painting the sidewalks with streaks of pink, blue, and violet. Her chest throbbed with a mix of fear, anticipation, and disbelief. She could not yet name what she would do with the truth when she found it. He walked with a purpose she had never seen at home. No hesitation. No glances over his shoulder. Just a confident, unfamiliar stride that made her stomach twist. Claire had expected him to slip into the shadows, to hide like a thief of secrets. But Daniel entered a small side street and stopped in front of a low brick building. Its sign flickered in cursive, "The Velvet Lily." Her pulse quickened. The bass of music thumped faintly through the walls. The smell of perfume and cigarette smoke drifted out to greet her. She stayed hidden behind a column, watching him push open the door and vanish into a world she had never imagined. Claire waited a beat, then followed. The moment she stepped inside, she was engulfed in a sea of color, glittering costumes, dramatic makeup, and laughter that rang like bells in the dim haze. Patrons swayed to the music, their expressions unguarded, authentic. For the first time, Claire felt the weight of the lies at home. The sterile calm, the measured smiles, the carefully curated perfection. Then she saw him. Daniel was transformed. Not merely wearing a wig or lipstick, he was Danielle. The sequined dress she had glimpsed in the closet hugged his form with precision. His shoulders relaxed, his lips curved naturally, a version of himself she had never witnessed. He laughed at a joke from the bartender, twirling effortlessly, hair catching the dim light like fire. Claire's stomach churned. It was not shame she felt, not even betrayal in its purest sense. It was grief. The man she thought she knew was layered over someone else entirely. She realized she had loved a ghost for years, and the real person had existed in secret, somewhere she had no access. She lingered in the corner, unseen, absorbing every detail. The drag performers moved with grace and defiance, their identities fluid, their courage radiant. Claire's gaze returned to Danielle again and again. The tilt of the head, the way the heels clicked against the floor, the tiny curl of a finger brushing back hair. Daniel was alive here in a way he could never be at home. A bartender caught her staring. Claire smiled politely, pretending to browse the menu, but inside her mind raced. The pieces she had discovered in the closet now made sense, but understanding did not bring relief. Instead, a spiral of questions began. Questions about trust, identity, and the secrets she could no longer ignore. Hours passed like minutes. Danielle greeted friends, shared jokes, and moved with an ease Claire had never seen. And in every glance, every smile, she felt the distance of their apartment, the cold precision of their private life. She understood something profoundly. The world she thought she shared with Daniel was a carefully constructed illusion. When Danielle finally stepped out into the night, removing the wig and coat, the city returned its gray anonymity. Claire followed silently, unsure whether to confront, retreat, or continue her observation. She felt the first real crack in her calm, the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. Back at the apartment, she would need to speak to someone, confide in someone, test the edges of her fear. But for tonight, she held the image of him in sequins and heels burned into her mind, the hidden life, the mirror of a truth she could no longer ignore. Tomorrow she would confront him. But tonight she only watched. Claire sat in her apartment the next morning, replaying every detail of the previous night. The images of Daniel as Danielle lingered like shadows across her walls. Sequins, heels, laughter, the soft sway of shoulders, all of it refused to leave her mind. She felt dizzy, as though she had been pulled through another life, one parallel to her own, and returned altered, fragile, aware of a truth she was not ready to name. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every polished surface, every framed photograph of smiling friends seemed to mock her ignorance. She moved through the rooms mechanically, brushing her fingers against silk scarves Daniel had left carelessly draped over chairs, traces of perfume still faint. The fabric whispered secrets she could not yet understand, teasing her with what she was not meant to see. By mid-morning, her phone rang. It was Maya, her best friend, her confidant since college. Claire hesitated before answering. Her voice sounded unnatural, restrained. "Hey," she said finally. "You sound off," Maya replied immediately. "What happened last night?" Claire forced a smile she knew Maya couldn't see. "Nothing. Just tired." "Work stuff." But the truth tumbled in her chest, sharp and relentless. "Maya, I saw him," she said finally, voice low. "I mean, Daniel, or someone else, at a bar." There was a pause. On the other end, Maya's sigh carried both concern and disbelief. "Claire, what do you mean?" She struggled to find words that would make sense, but no sentence felt right. "He dresses in women's clothing. I don't know. I thought I knew him. I thought we were normal." The silence that followed was suffocating. Maya's eventual reply was gentle, cautious. "Claire, there's a lot people hide. Sometimes it's nothing dangerous. Sometimes it's complicated. You need to be careful. Secrets like this, they can destroy more than trust." Claire ended the call, trembling. She sank into the velvet chair, her fingers brushing the silk scarves again. Each piece of fabric seemed to pulse with life, a reminder of Daniel's double existence. Her mind oscillated between anger, confusion, and the unbearable curiosity that would not be silenced. By afternoon, Daniel returned home. He carried groceries, the scent of rain on his coat. He smiled at her, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her. She studied him silently, every tilt of his head, every movement, noting the practiced calm, the polish, the perfection that hid what she had witnessed. Dinner passed quietly. Words were measured. Smiles were careful. Yet the air was thick with unsaid truths, heavy enough to crush. Claire realized she could no longer live in the illusion. She had glimpsed the hidden life, and it now existed in her consciousness as undeniable fact. Later, in her bedroom, she opened the closet, arranging the scarves and dresses exactly as she found them, hands shaking. Each item seemed to whisper to her, "Watch, learn, decide." She felt a new resolve, a quiet decision forming. She would uncover the full truth, even if it terrified her. That night, as the city hummed beneath the apartment, Claire lay awake, thinking of questions she could not yet ask. She would confront him, eventually, but first she needed proof, certainty. And above all, she needed to prepare herself for the consequences of what she might discover, because tomorrow, she decided, she would insist he see a doctor. And in the cold, clinical truth of test results, she would confront a reality that neither silk nor secrecy could hide. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and fear. Claire had insisted Daniel come with her that morning, the chill of early September biting through their coats as they walked to the small building tucked between a coffee shop and a florist. He had nodded politely, a smile plastered in place, but she had caught the faint flicker of annoyance in his eyes. The man she followed into the Velvet Lily weeks ago was a stranger now. The Daniel sitting beside her in the waiting room was a performance. Calm and measured, hiding the secrets she already suspected. Sitting side by side, Claire tried to speak casually, discussing lunch plans or exhibitions at the gallery. Daniel's responses were clipped, courteous but detached. He placed a hand over hers for a moment, warm and familiar, and yet it did not reach her heart. She withdrew slightly, aware that love had dissolved into observation, that trust had been replaced by investigation. The nurse called Daniel first. He rose, adjusting his sleeve, his movements flawless and precise. Claire watched him walk away, a strange sense of dread pressing in her chest. She fidgeted with her bracelet, imagining all the possible outcomes, none of them good. When the nurse returned to take her own sample, she barely registered the prick of the needle. The anxiety had consumed her entirely. Hours later, back at the apartment, Claire tried to distract herself. She walked through their rooms, straightening pillows, folding scarves, her mind replaying Daniel's transformation at the bar. Sequins, heels, wigs, all of it now intertwined with the nagging suspicion that their entire life together was built on concealed truths. The apartment felt smaller, claustrophobic, the walls whispering secrets she could no longer ignore. Then the envelope arrived. Claire picked it up with trembling hands, the clinic's logo staring back at her like a challenge. She slid it open slowly, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The first words she saw made her stomach lurch. HIV positive. The paper slipped from her hands, fluttering to the floor. She sank onto the couch, gripping the edge with both hands, struggling to breathe. The revelation was a punch she had not anticipated. Anger, fear, disbelief. They collided inside her, leaving her trembling and hollow. The man she loved, the man she had shared a decade with, had been hiding a dangerous secret, one that now threatened her in the most intimate and terrifying way. Her mind raced. How long had he known? Did he ever intend to tell her? The silk scarves, the sequins, the lipstick, were they just expressions of identity or markers of a life she could never touch? Every moment she had thought of him as safe, predictable, and familiar now seemed a lie. And lurking beneath it all was a darker thought. Betrayal, intentional or not, that had placed her at risk. Daniel entered the room carrying groceries, unaware of the storm building behind her eyes. She looked at him, really looked for the first time in weeks. The smile, the polite greeting, the casual tilt of his head, all of it masked the truth she now held. I saw the results, she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to keep control. Daniel froze, his expression unreadable, the mask slipping just slightly. You're positive, she finished. He did not speak immediately. The silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Then, in a voice quieter than she had ever heard, he admitted it. Yes, he knew. Yes, he had kept it from her. He tried to explain, to justify, to calm, but his words dissolved into a blur of excuses, half-truths and regret. Claire listened, her chest tightening, rage and fear entwined in a knot she could not untangle. The man beside her, the man she had married, had fractured every boundary of trust she had ever known. And in that silence, filled with unspoken accusations and trembling words, she realized that nothing would ever be the same. Her hands shook. She pressed her palms into her face, feeling the heat of anger rise through her body. Daniel's confession, partial, hesitant, human, was the spark that ignited the next phase of her mind. The seed of fury, of judgment, of action was planted. Tonight she decided they would speak again. And when that conversation came, she would no longer be the wife who asked questions politely. She would demand answers, and if the truth required it, she would deliver consequences that neither silk nor secrecy could shield him from. The blood test had changed everything. That night, the apartment was a cavern of shadows. Rain streaked the windows, casting jagged moving patterns across the walls. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, hands clenched, waiting for Daniel to arrive home. She could hear every footstep on the marble floors, every distant siren, every distant heartbeat in her own chest. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of words yet to be spoken, truths that would either heal or shatter everything. When Daniel finally entered, dripping from the rain, his coat clinging to his body, he paused mid-step at the sight of her. She did not move. She did not speak. Her eyes bore into him, searching for some trace of the man she had loved before secrets corroded their lives. Claire, he began, voice low, hesitant, uncertain. I know you saw the results. She said nothing, only let the silence stretch, her mind circling the scene like a predator. He stepped closer, placing his hands on the bed beside her, trying to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. I didn't mean to hide it, he confessed, eyes glinting with shame. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I thought I could handle it myself. I didn't know how to tell you. Claire's chest tightened. Anger surged, mingling with betrayal and grief. You didn't handle it, she whispered, voice trembling. You put me at risk. You lied every day, every touch, every kiss. Daniel's shoulders slumped. He sank beside her, hesitant, fragile, as though the weight of the world rested on his spine. I know, he said softly. I know it was wrong. I wasn't thinking. I was selfish. I thought love could protect us from reality. Claire wanted to scream, to strike, to shake the truth out of him until it bled pure and raw. But instead she listened. Each word, each confession, etched deeper into her consciousness. She realized that the man she had married was both fragile and dangerous, not malicious, perhaps, but capable of secrets that could destroy. Daniel, she said finally, voice firm, do you understand what this means? Do you understand the choices you made, the lies you told, the lives you touched? Do you even understand me? He nodded slowly, shame flooding his features. I do, I see it now. I see everything, the fear, the hurt, the distance. I know I failed you, and I'm so sorry. Silence settled again, heavier this time, punctuated by the rain hammering against the windows. Claire studied him in the dim light, the flicker of shadows revealing the duality she had glimpsed in secret, the polished, composed husband and the hidden identity that lived in sequins and wigs. She understood that love alone could not reconcile the contradictions, could not undo the damage. For hours they spoke in fragments, their confessions and denials intertwining with tears and trembling words. Daniel admitted not only to hiding his diagnosis, but to the double life he had maintained for years: the bar, the drag persona, the nights of secrecy. Claire's mind reeled. Every lie, every hidden choice, every whisper in silk became a thread in a tapestry of deception. Yet, within the torrent of revelation, a strange clarity emerged. She knew who he was, truly, and she knew that the man she married had ceased to exist the moment secrets took root. Love was no longer sufficient. Trust had been irreparably fractured. Finally, Claire stood, a trembling but resolute figure in the dark. "I needed to hear the truth," she said. "And I have. But hearing it changes nothing. I can't go back." Daniel reached for her, but she stepped away, leaving his hand hovering, empty. "I need time," she whispered. "And after this, nothing will ever be the same." As she walked toward the bedroom door, she glanced back at him. The man she loved, the man she feared, the man who had been both her husband and a stranger. Tonight, the confessions had been spoken. But tomorrow, the consequences would begin. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her, both gathering in intensity. And somewhere deep in her mind, a darker resolution began to take shape, one that would force the truth into action. Regardless of fear, love, or morality, the breaking point was near. Days passed like jagged fragments, each one heavier than the last. Claire moved through her apartment in a haze, observing Daniel as if he were an exhibit behind glass. His smiles, his calm, his attempts at intimacy all seeming performative. Hollow, a mask stretched over a dangerous truth. She no longer recognized the man beside her. She recognized only the lies he had lived and the risks he had imposed. Sleep evaded her. Nights stretched into hours of replaying words, expressions, and secrets. She imagined every possible scenario, every hidden motive. What if his deceit had been intentional? What if she was more vulnerable than she realized? Every shadow seemed a witness to her fear. Every mirror reflected a stranger's despair. By midweek, obsession had taken hold. Claire began documenting Daniel's routines, tracing his movements, noting patterns. She revisited the closet, handling wigs and dresses with the same careful precision he once had, cataloging what she saw with a mix of dread and fascination. She touched the sequined fabrics, the silk scarves, the lipstick stains, and felt a fury coiling in her chest, a taut wire ready to snap. Her thoughts darkened. The HIV diagnosis hung in the air like an unspoken verdict. She imagined all the things she could do to control, punish, or ensure safety, from confrontation to more drastic measures. Every scenario played in her mind with frightening clarity. She saw herself standing over him, controlling the outcome for the first time in years. The impulse was raw, urgent, and intoxicating. Maya noticed the change. "Claire," she said during a lunch that should have been ordinary, "you're not yourself. You're exhausted, obsessed. You need to step back." Claire forced a laugh, but it did not reach her eyes. "I'm fine. I need to understand him. I need to know everything before I make any decisions." Maya's concern deepened. "Claire, don't let fear decide for you. Secrets can consume us if we let them." Claire nodded, but her mind had already moved beyond caution. The hours at the apartment, alone with her thoughts, had twisted fear into resolve. She could no longer wait for explanations, for apologies, or for Daniel to return to the version of himself she once loved. The man she had married no longer existed. What remained was a stranger who had endangered her, deceived her, and hidden a life from her that she could never forgive. Late at night, she observed him again, quietly, silently. Daniel moved through the apartment, unaware of the storm brewing behind her calm facade. She studied his habits, his hesitations, his comfort in the spaces he had once claimed for himself. Every movement reinforced the truth she had accepted. Control had shifted. She was no longer passive. She was calculating. Claire's mind raced with possibilities. Words of rage intertwined with visions of confrontation, with meticulous plans, each more dangerous than the last. The line between right and wrong blurred, until morality became secondary to survival and the need for justice, or what she defined as justice. By the time Daniel went to bed, Claire sat at the edge of the room, hands folded, breathing controlled. The fury inside her simmered beneath the surface, restrained but alive. She knew her next move would define everything. The path forward would be irreversible. The breaking point had arrived. Tomorrow, she decided, she would act with precision, calmly, deliberately. Nothing would be left to chance. She had reached the point where observation alone was no longer enough. The secrets, the deception, the betrayal demanded a response. And in the quiet darkness of their apartment, with the city humming below, Claire understood the truth she could no longer ignore. Tonight was only the calm before the storm, and the storm would be hers to unleash. The apartment smelled of wine and candle wax. Claire had spent hours preparing, selecting china, polishing silver, and arranging the table so it seemed ordinary, welcoming, as though nothing sinister lingered beneath the surface. Every detail was precise, the napkins folded perfectly, the glasses catching the light at the correct angle, the roses in the center of the table crimson, their scent faint but deliberate. Daniel arrived at the appointed hour, still damp from the evening rain, carrying the faint aroma of the city with him. His coat dripped lightly onto the marble floor, and his eyes softened at the sight of Claire, who greeted him with a fragile, composed smile. For a moment, she allowed the illusion to persist, the pretense of normalcy, the fragile facade of reconciliation. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice gentle, unaware of the storm beneath her calm. "Thank you," she replied softly, her hands steady despite the thrum of adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Sit. Dinner's ready." They ate quietly at first, the only sound the clink of cutlery against plates, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of traffic outside. Daniel spoke politely, asking about Claire's day, about her gallery work, his voice measured, smooth. She nodded, offering short, precise responses. Every smile, every gesture was a calculation, a mask she wore to lure him into a false sense of security. Claire's eyes flicked to the wine she had poured into his glass. Deep red, smooth, deceptive. She had spent the afternoon preparing it carefully, ensuring it would act quickly, leaving no trace until the moment it was too late. Her heart beat rapidly, but she remained composed, almost serene, as if she were merely a hostess attending to a routine dinner. Daniel leaned back slightly, laughing at a story she told about an exhibition. His laughter sounded unfamiliar to her, a sound she once cherished, but now found hollow. She studied the lines of his face, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way he moved, unaware of the danger seated beside him. "You've been distant," he said, suddenly lowering his fork. His eyes searched hers, trying to penetrate the calm she displayed. "I feel like there's something you're not telling me." Claire smiled faintly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "I've just been thinking," she said. "About us. About everything. I wanted tonight to be about understanding, forgiveness." Her words were deliberate, measured, a whispering trap. Daniel's brow furrowed. "Forgiveness?" he echoed. He hesitated, unsure, the unease beginning to flicker across his expression. "Yes," she said softly, eyes locked on his. "I wanted to forgive you, but also to ensure you understand the consequences of your choices." He leaned forward, confusion growing. "Claire, what do you mean?" Her hand shook slightly as she lifted the wine glass, her thumb brushing the rim. "I mean," she said, voice calm, almost tender, "that love has limits. And tonight, we will see what those limits are." He looked at her, not yet comprehending the weight of her words, the cold resolve in her gaze. The air between them thickened, taut with anticipation, fear, and unspoken truths. Every second stretched, every heartbeat a drum counting down the moment before fate intervened. Claire sipped her wine first, then set the glass gently back on the table. She watched him raise his own, oblivious, smiling faintly at her expression. The final moment approached, quiet, deliberate, inevitable. And as the candlelight flickered across the polished silver and crimson roses, the veneer of reconciliation hung delicately in the air, masking the darkness that waited patiently for the night to end. Tomorrow, the consequences would be revealed. Tonight, the dinner would end, one way or another. The morning arrived quietly, the city wrapped in fog and muted sunlight. Claire awoke with a measured calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes fixed on the city beyond the window. The apartment was silent, almost serene, the aftermath of last night hidden beneath the polished floors and carefully arranged linens. She moved slowly, deliberately, her heartbeat steady, her mind already anticipating the next steps. Daniel, or Danielle as she had come to see him, had not stirred. The house smelled faintly of wine and roses, traces of the dinner lingering like a memory no one else would notice. Claire approached the bedroom, the polished wood floors soft beneath her feet. Her reflection in the hallway mirror calm, composed, unbroken. The bedroom door creaked slightly as she pushed it open. Daniel lay on the bed, still. The sequined dress, the silk scarves, the carefully curated identity that had once danced through neon-lit bars, all absent now. In their place was a figure rendered silent by the consequences Claire had calculated so carefully. Her chest tightened briefly, a pang she could not suppress entirely, but it was swiftly replaced by a cold, measured certainty. The man who had deceived her, endangered her, and hidden his life was no longer capable of lying, no longer capable of hurting anyone else. She knelt beside him, her hands resting lightly on the sheets. The warmth she had once associated with love, with intimacy, with trust, was gone. Only the echo of betrayal remained, stretching through the room like a shadow that refused to leave. Claire's eyes studied every line of his face, noting the subtle relaxation of muscles, the quiet finality in his expression. Outside, the city moved unaware. Cars honked, sirens wailed, and pedestrians hurried along streets that would never know the secrets of a high-rise apartment where a husband's duplicity ended in silence. The contrast between the world's ordinary rhythm and the extraordinary darkness within the walls of their home pressed on her like a weight. Claire sat back slightly, folding her hands in her lap, letting her mind drift through the sequence of events, the careful precision of her actions, the inevitability she had felt growing over days and nights. The act itself had been swift, deliberate, almost clinical. She had controlled the timing, the means, ensuring the finality she now observed with detached focus. Her phone vibrated quietly on the nightstand. A message from Maya. "Are you okay? You missed brunch. Call me." Claire stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over it. She considered the lie she would tell, the story she would maintain for the outside world. Normalcy would continue beyond these walls, the apartment unchanged to anyone who did not see the truth. She placed the phone back gently, letting it rest. Silence returned. The quiet was thick, suffocating, yet in it, Claire felt the clarity of purpose. She had acted, controlled the chaos that had threatened to destroy her, and now the consequences, unavoidable and irreversible, lay before her. The city would move on. Friends would call, work would demand attention, routines would resume, but within the walls of the apartment, within the stillness of a life ended, a story had been written, one that no one else would read, and one that would haunt Claire, shaping the rest of her days. She rose slowly, straightened the sheets and left the room, leaving the door closed behind her. Outside, the world carried on, unaware of Danielle's death and the truths that would soon come to light. The apartment was silent now, stripped of its earlier pretense. The polished floors, the carefully arranged linens, the crimson roses, all remained. But their beauty felt hollow, a mask over the chaos and secrets that had unraveled in the last days. Claire moved through the rooms with deliberate calm, observing the remnants of the life she had once shared. Each item was a witness to deception, betrayal, and the act that had finally broken the illusion. Detectives arrived mid-morning, polite, procedural, and unrelenting. They moved through the apartment with practiced efficiency, photographing the scene, cataloging evidence, and asking questions. Claire answered with a quiet composure that belied the storm beneath her calm exterior. Her statements were measured, precise, avoiding unnecessary detail, yet revealing enough to keep suspicion at bay. She passed in her sleep, Claire said, voice steady, eyes fixed on the city beyond the window. I found him this morning. I called immediately. The detectives exchanged glances, noting inconsistencies, but Claire remained poised, almost too composed, her grief restrained. In their experience, appearances could be deceptive. And in this apartment, every polished surface, every shadowed corner seemed to whisper that truth was layered beneath performance. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. The subways rumbled, taxis honked, and pedestrians walked unaware of the tragedy that had played out high above them. Claire watched from the window, feeling a strange detachment. The life she had known, the curated perfection, the loving gestures, the hidden evenings and whispered lies, had been reduced to fragments she could catalog but never repair. During questioning, the detectives eventually uncovered details of Daniel's hidden life, the costumes, the wigs, the bar, the careful secrecy of a parallel existence that had remained unknown to the world. They discovered his diagnosis, his careful concealment, and the risks he had imposed upon Claire. Slowly, a narrative emerged, complex and morally tangled. The story was no longer about innocence or guilt in simple terms. It was about secrets, trust, and the consequences of deception. Claire answered each question with clarity, acknowledging her awareness of the hidden life while carefully framing her actions as a response to prolonged deceit and danger. The detectives listened, occasionally jotting notes, occasionally exchanging quiet murmurs. They saw in her a woman shaped by betrayal, by fear, by the slow accumulation of truths that no one else had revealed until now. By the afternoon, the initial investigation concluded. Officers and forensic teams departed, leaving the apartment quiet again. Claire walked through the rooms, touching the scarves, the remnants of lipstick, the traces of sequins now folded neatly into drawers. She paused before the bedroom door, the room behind it containing the man who had been both her husband and a stranger. The life she had once shared now ended. In that silence, she understood something profound. Truth was not always comforting. Justice was not always fair. Love could be deceptive, destructive, and transformative. The ashes of her past life, both literal and metaphorical, would remain, shaping her memory, her morality, and her future. Later, alone, Claire sat by the window, the city sprawling endlessly beneath her. She reflected on the choices made, the secrets unveiled, and the price of uncovering truth. In every shadow, in every echo of the apartment, she felt both the weight of consequence and the clarity of finality. The city carried on. Friends would speculate, the world would gossip, and news might even reach distant ears. But Claire knew that some truths, the ones hidden behind love, betrayal, and secrecy, existed only for those willing to confront them. And she had confronted them fully, leaving only the ashes behind. In the stillness, she whispered to herself, "Nothing will ever be the same." And for the first time since the discovery, the calm she felt was not fear. It was certainty. Months had passed since the apartment had been cleared, since the echoes of secrets, betrayal, and the final act of Daniel's hidden life had faded into the silence of absence. Claire moved through her home with a quiet, measured routine, but the memory of the past lingered, settling in the corners like dust that refused to be swept away. Every polished surface, every mirror, every shard of glass reflected not just her image, but the weight of everything she had endured. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, studying herself. The reflection was calm, composed, a woman who had survived deceit, danger, and moral complexity. But beneath the surface, the truth of what she had done, the consequences she had initiated, shimmered faintly, impossible to erase. The mirror never lied. It reflected not just appearances, but the honesty of what had been carried inside her for months. Grief, fury, clarity, and a strange, resolute strength. Claire ran her fingers along the frame, tracing the delicate carvings, her gaze never leaving her own eyes. Those eyes had seen things they should never have seen, understood truths they were never meant to carry. She thought of the secrets, the wigs, the dresses, the hidden nights, and the blood that had changed her life forever. The man she had loved had been revealed in fragments. A husband, a stranger, a performer, a danger. And in the mirror, she recognized herself. Survivor, witness, executor of consequences. Her phone buzzed lightly on the dresser. She ignored it, letting the vibrations fade, refusing the intrusion of ordinary life. The city continued outside, relentless, indifferent, humming beneath her window. People went about their routines, unaware of the story that had unfolded within her walls. A narrative of love, deception, discovery, and irrevocable action. Claire reflected on the months since Danielle's death. Friends had checked in, colleagues had offered condolences, and life had resumed its rhythm. But she had been changed. Nothing about her previous existence, no gallery opening, no charity gala, no polished smile, could erase the fractures that had run deep. She had learned that appearances were fragile, that truth could be deadly, and that trust was not a given, but a privilege that could be revoked in an instant. In the quiet of the room, she allowed herself to remember the moments of confrontation, the blood test, the confessions, the dinner, the final act. Each memory was sharp, precise, and undeniable. The mirror reflected the consequences of those moments as surely as it reflected her features. She no longer feared the reflection. She understood it. Claire took a deep breath and straightened her posture. The mirror, the city, and the world outside were witnesses to her resolve. She would continue her life, but she would do so knowing that the truth, no matter how devastating, no matter how dark, would always be visible if she chose to look. The lessons of love, betrayal, and hidden lives were etched permanently into her consciousness. For the first time in months, she smiled, a small, quiet smile, not for Daniel, not for the city, but for herself. The mirror showed the woman she had become, honest, vigilant, unflinching. The reflection was no longer a threat. It was confirmation. The mirror never lies, she thought. And now she was certain she could face anything. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the private storms and resolutions that had shaped one apartment and one life forever. Inside, Claire remained, unshaken and aware, ready to step forward into a world that would never know the depth of the truths she had uncovered, but which she would carry with quiet authority for the rest of her days.